All right. I am very, very, very excited and grateful for all of you that are here today. So I know we have a lot of our world studies, world lit, world history students, but we have a bunch of other classes as well that are here. So I just want to say welcome and thank you for coming. I'm going to thank you in advance for being respectful, for listening, for being thoughtful today. Miss, can I call you Kathy, Katie? What do you want me to call
me Kati,
All right. Kathy Preston, right here, is a wonderful human being. So as some of you know, because I've come into your classes, I do some work with the state of New Hampshire on the Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission for the state of New Hampshire. Kathy is on that with me. She is a survivor of the Holocaust, and today she's here to tell you her story. We will hopefully at the end have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So we have a couple microphones here, or if you're like nervous about asking questions, you can whisper it to one of us and then we can ask your question as well. But as Kathy says, she does not bite, so feel free. We are gonna ask that you hold any questions until the end though, however, please. So if you think of any, if you are someone who forgets them, feel free to like take out your phone super fast and like jot them down on your phone. But please make sure your phones and your headphones are away for this whole time. Again, I appreciate that in advance. Without further ado, I'm gonna just hand it right over to you. So let's give a welcome to Kathy Preston.
Hi guys, you can hear me? Yes, okay. As she said, my name is Kati Preston. I am a Holocaust survivor. I was not in a camp. I'm a child survivor. I was a hidden child. I was not interned anywhere. I was saved by somebody. And the reason that I come and speak is because there are less and less people alive from that era. I'm 83 years old, and whatever I'm talking about happened over 70 years ago. So you can imagine it's a long, long time. And there's not many people who are still alive, and those who are still alive, a lot of them can't talk about it. And I found that a few years ago, I had a granddaughter in a school in Manchester, and she said to me, "Grandma, nobody ever heard of the Holocaust in our school. In those days, they weren't teaching it." And she wanted me to come and speak to her class. It was an 8th grade. And I was kind of worried. I thought, oh no, she's going to be so ashamed, you know, grandma coming to speak and so on. And I went and spoke at her school, and it was wonderful. It was a sort of a love fest. And I was hooked because I found that I loved speaking to 8th grade because they're sort of half angels, half devils, you know. You can still reach them, you know. And especially the boys, they come in all full of swagger, you know, all macho. And by the time I finish speaking, they're back to being kids again. And I just love this whole generation. And I found that the more I speak, the more I feel in touch with you guys, and it's such a healing situation for me. I come from a small town in a place called Transylvania. You know where the vampires come from. They don't exist, and it's a myth, but they still hang garlic on the windows everywhere in Transylvania. It's a small area between Hungary and Romania, and it keeps changing. Depending who wins which war, it's either Romania or Hungary. When all this was going on, I was persecuted in Hungary. It is now the same place, but it's now Romania. And who knows where it's going to be soon. I come from a small town, not much bigger than, I would say, Concord. And it was a nice little town. It was civilized. It was near the Hungarian, Romanian border. It was a prosperous little town. We even had an opera house. There were several churches, several synagogues, and it was a prosperous little town. And when things are good financially, people don't hate each other as much. There were a lot of Hungarians living there, a lot of Romanians, and a lot of Roma, gypsies, and a big Jewish community. My parents for those days were very unusual. My mother was a Catholic and my father was a Jew. And when they got married, they were both disowned by their families. It just wasn't done. People didn't intermarry. It was absolutely no. And they were very happy together, despite the fact that they were ostracized. And they weren't very religious. I remember my mother, who converted to Judaism to please my father's big Jewish family, would light a candle on Friday nights, and she would have a scarf on her head, and she would light candles and mutter something in what I thought was a foreign tongue. And I thought it was magic. I wasn't quite sure what she was doing. But that was about the extent of her religiosity. But, you know, they were, for those days, very well off. My mother was a dressmaker. People didn't buy clothes in a shop like they do now. People would buy a cloth, and then they would go to a dressmaker who would then make a garment for them. And my mother had 40 girls working for her. It was a big business. She was doing very well. People came from far and wide to buy dresses from her. My father had a fish business. He would wholesale fish. There was a river that went through the town, and he had great big crates of carp swimming in the river, big crates, and he would wholesale them. And I remember as a kid, there was always a carp swimming in our bath. We ate lots of them. And I was about 4.5, and I remember talking to this carp, and it looked like an old peasant with long whiskers, and I would talk to it, and I would say, look, I'm so sorry we're going to eat you, but you're going to taste so good. And I felt better that way, you know. I didn't feel so guilty. And we did eat a lot of carp, and it did taste very good. And I had an absolutely wonderful childhood. My parents, at this point, my mother was 30 and my father was 40. They had me relatively late in life. In those days, people had children much earlier. And I was spoiled rotten. I had absolutely everything a child could possibly want. I had a beautiful room, and the bed was like the bed of a princess with lace hangings and wonderful, wonderful wallpaper and lots and lots and lots of toys. And my father was my hero. I loved my daddy. Any of you girls who are close to your dads would know what I'm talking about, that feeling of love and security that you have when your daddy holds you and he tells you a story, or he takes you somewhere with him. That feeling of security and love and peace, you cannot recapture that. Nobody else can give you that feeling. People often ask me what's in the bottle. I tell them it's vodka. It's not, unfortunately. Anyway. But people always say, what's in the bottle? Well, what do you think is in the bottle? Anyway, so I was really daddy's little girl, you know. He would tell me stories, and he always explained things to me. In those days, kids were just told, do this, do that, go here, go there. They were not treated like people. And he would always explain things to me, and he was very kind to me. And he always taught me things, and he taught me all the constellations at night, and I still know all the constellations in Hungarian, believe it or not, after all these years. And he was such a kind, good man. And my parents, although they were not really very religious in any way, they let me have a Christmas tree because they didn't want to deprive me of Christmas. And we always had this very tall tree. We had very high ceilings, and we had this huge tree with little candles on it. And every single Christmas we had a fire, because you take a fir tree and you light a candle, you know what happens. And I remember Christmas for me is a beautiful smell of burning Christmas tree. They would throw water on the tree and extinguish it, and that lovely smell of burning fir tree. I loved it. I loved Christmas. And one day, one of the maids decided to take me to the local church to show me the nativity scene. And you know, the little statues and everything. And I stole baby Jesus. Well, he didn't have any clothes, and I decided to take him home and get him some baby clothes, because poor thing didn't have any clothes. So I stuck him under my coat, and I went home, and my mother takes my coat off, and she says, "Oh my God, they're going to say the Jews are stealing Jesus." Get right back there now and apologize. And I was dragged back, you know, I was 4.5 at this point. I was dragged back to apologize to the priest. And there was this gentleman. He was very tall and skinny, had a nose like a toucan, big, long finger, and he waved it at me and he said, "You're going to hell for stealing Jesus. It's enough to put you off religion for life." I was terrified, and I was crying, and I gave Jesus back. I said, I just wanted to give him some clothes. They didn't want to hear why I stole Jesus. I was just evil, an evil child. My parents at this point decided that they had an out-of-control 4.5-year-old, and something had to be done. So they got me a governess. Boy, did they get me a governess. This woman was an Austrian lady. She was tall and skinny, and she had a bun on her head, and I don't think she had any lips, because I never saw her smile. I think it was just a slash for a mouth. And she was very strict. She was so strict, and she terrified me. And you know, when I sat at the table, I had to have a hard-boiled egg under each armpit so that I wouldn't flap my wings when I ate. Of course, no elbows on the table, absolutely not. And then she had a ruler on the back of the chair, and she had a string around my neck and one around my waist so that I would have good posture. Well, look, it worked. I'm 83 and look at my posture now. So she did something good, but she was really evil. She used to tell me these stories, you know, some of these stories are child abuse, really. In those days, people wanted to frighten children into behaving. It wasn't education, it was scaring children. And these stories about little kids who are burnt because they play with matches, and other little kids who are fattened up for Christmas because they're going to get eaten, all kinds of horror stories. And this woman really loved telling me these stories, and I was terrified. And you know, the Grimm brothers too. I mean, it's a good name for them, Grimm brothers. They were grim. And they shouldn't. Children should have happy stories, but no, the education was totally different. And you know, if you think you washed your hands a lot during COVID, you have no idea. This woman was a hand-washing maniac. She really believed in cleanliness being next to godliness, and I had to wash my hands every 10 minutes. It was hell. And I wasn't allowed to play with the children in the street anymore because they were not the right children. There was only one little boy I was allowed to play with who lived up the road because his father was rich. He was acceptable to her because she was a snob. And this little boy was so cute. He had big blue eyes and blonde curly hair like you over there. And he was adorable, and I used to love this little boy. And we had this game. We were running up outside the opera house. It had a round driveway, and if I caught him, I kissed him, and I learned to run very fast. And I kissed this poor little boy whenever I could, and he hated it, but I loved him. That was my only friend that I was allowed to play with. And Fräulein, which means miss in German, made me go out for a walk in any weather. It didn't matter if it was cold or hot. You know, you had to walk every day because it was healthy. And she believed in a healthy life and a healthy mind and a healthy body. And she dragged me out for these walks. And my father would give me money for the beggars, and he told me to give it to anybody who needed it. And I would say, well, how do I know they need it? And he says, no, you don't understand. If somebody's begging, you have to give them the money because you're fortunate, your parents have money. Those people who are begging are no different from you. They're exactly like you. They just don't have the luck that you have, and you make sure that you give them that money. And it was difficult because Fräulein made me hold my breath when I was near poor people because she thought it would contaminate me. So I had to hold my breath and run and give the people the money very quickly so that she wouldn't be upset with me. And I complained to my daddy and I said, look, I don't like Fräulein. She's mean, she's nasty. And he said, you don't understand, dear. You have to have a governess if you want to be a lady. They thought that, you know, having a governess would make me better class or something. But she was an absolute nasty lady. And she was really mean. I didn't like her at all. And at this point, my father's Jewish family forgave them, and they would come to dinner. And there were 28 members of this family, and there would be a table almost as long as this stage, and they would all come and have dinner with us. I was the youngest one of them all. And I must say that in the 6 months that Fräulein was with us, she did teach me to read, speak, and write German, which was a big deal for a young kid like that. And when the family came to dinner, my parents would show me off, and I would have to stand up and say things in German, and everybody would go ooh and ah, pat me on the head and tell me how brilliant I was and how beautiful and wonderful. And I was really the center of the universe. It was wonderful. I was loved by everybody. Everybody was older than me. There were cousins and aunts and uncles, and I felt very, very happy. And at this point, they decided to send me to a Jewish kindergarten twice a week so that I would know something about my heritage. I don't remember much about this kindergarten, except the little blonde boy was there too, so I could carry on tormenting him. That's about all I can remember from my so-called Jewish education. And then things started to change. You know, people sometimes say, well, why did the Jews agree to go to the camps? It wasn't like that. It was a gradual erosion of our liberties. It was gradual and it was insidious. Slowly but surely, everything was taken from us. First, Jews were not allowed to go to college anymore. Then Jews weren't allowed to go to high school anymore. Then Jews were only allowed to go to Jewish school. Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat non-Jews. And then at one point, the Hungarian authorities were very sneaky. They made everybody register with the police. They wanted to protect us, they said. We all had to go and tell the police how many people lived in each place, where they all lived, and so on. So they had a list of everybody and everybody who was Jewish in town. And then women under the age of 45 were not allowed to work for a Jewish family. And a lot of the girls who worked for my mother disappeared, they left. And to my joy, Fräulein left. Oh, I was so happy. I didn't wash my hands for 3 weeks. It was heaven. Oh, she was gone. I was so happy. I couldn't wait to see her gone. And then my mother comes to me and she says, I have a present for you. And she brought me this beautiful yellow star that she made from gold material, and she sewed it onto my coat. And I was so proud of this little star. You know, I thought this was beautiful. Little girls like shiny things, and this beautiful yellow star on my coat. We go for pastries, and my mother takes me by the hand, and we're walking down the street, and I'm hopping next to her, and the man comes opposite and stops and looks at me, and I look up at him sort of expecting compliments, and he spits in my face, and the spit runs down my face onto my star. And I say to my mother, he hates stars, never thinking that it's me he hated. I thought he hated stars, and I took my mother by the hand, and I said, Mom, Mom, Mom. And this woman who always protected me took me by the hand and dragged me home and shushed me, and she says, I'll tell you when we get home. And she took me home. She didn't react. She just dragged me home, and she says, no, 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 you don't understand, my dear. It's not the star. He hates you. And I said, but why? And she says, because you're a Jew. I said, okay, so if I don't have the star, he won't know I'm a Jew, will he? He says, no. So take the star off. She says, no, 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 you don't understand. It's the law. You have to have the star. And even as a small child, I couldn't understand the logic of why I have to carry something on my body that will make people spit at me. It was very hard for me to understand this. And then the Hungarian authorities decided to start building a ghetto. You know, the word ghetto is an Italian word. It means a foundry. It's a metal foundry. And it comes from Venice. In the Middle Ages, they had a foundry in Venice, an old foundry which they closed down, and that's where the Jews were allowed to live. And they had to be in at night. They weren't allowed to go out during the night, only during the day. And that's where the word ghetto comes from. It's still there. It's called Il Vecchio Ghetto, the old ghetto, and you can still see it. But that's where that word comes from, which has such bad connotations now. They took an old part of town, and they built a great big brick wall with barbed wire on top, and they started to round up the Jews. And it was quite easy for them because they knew where everybody was. And I remember my father leaving, and he was holding my mother, and they were sobbing, and my father had a little suitcase next to him, and they were holding each other crying, and I was crying too. But I wasn't that worried. I thought my father would just go like on a business trip and come back and bring me presents like he always did. I didn't quite understand why everybody was so upset, but everybody was crying, so I cried too. And then my daddy left, and then there was a lot of noise, and I looked through the window, and there were carts and trucks parked in front of our house, and there were soldiers in green uniforms with black feathers in their hats, and they had whips and they had guns, and they were herding people onto these vehicles, and people were falling down, and they were being kicked, and they were screaming and yelling, and they were pushing people onto these vehicles, and it all happened so fast, and suddenly everybody was gone. But they were taken so fast, they didn't have time to take care of their pets. And all their the dogs and cats were running around with no masters. And I was very upset as a little girl. I was watching this, and I thought, the poor animals, you know, I was really more upset about the animals than I was about the people. And I went downstairs and tried to feed all these animals, and then the dog catcher came, and that was pretty horrible. He had a long stick with a wire on it, like a wire loop, and he had a truck, and then he would catch these animals by the neck and throw them into this truck, and then he came and he took all the animals away. And then there was total silence. And I was really upset, and I was supposed to go to the camp as well, to the ghetto, because basically the Hungarians took anybody who had any Jewish blood. It wasn't by religion, it was by blood. My mother, although she converted to Judaism, was not considered a Jew because she was a Catholic, and I was considered a Jew because I had a Jewish father. But even if you had one Jewish grandparent, your blood was tainted and you had to be taken away. But my mother hid me. She thought they would not notice one little girl missing. And she hid me at home, and I was supposed to stay under the bed if anybody came and not go near the window. And I wasn't allowed to run in the apartment in case the neighbors would hear my footsteps. And I hated it. I felt like I was a prisoner, and I was complaining all the time. And then a woman came to see my mother. We used to buy milk from a farmer. People didn't buy food in supermarkets. There were no supermarkets. There were markets, and there were peasants who would bring food into town. This young woman would bring, she had a cart and a horse, and she had a big vat of milk at the back of the cart, and you'd come downstairs and she'd measure out the milk, and this is how you bought your milk. And she was a very simple, ordinary Hungarian Christian peasant girl. And when she got married, my mother found out she was an orphan, and she gifted her a beautiful wedding dress. And the girl never forgot it. And when she heard that they're rounding up the Jews, knowing that my mother married a Jew, she came to see my mother, and she says, "Where's your little girl?" And my mother said, "Shh, I'm hiding her." She says, "No, no, 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 no. Give her to me. I'll take her out to my farm, and she'll be safe there, because she won't be found, and everything will be fine. Just let her come with me." And you know, now I realize how brave my mother was, handing her only spoiled child to this woman she hardly knew, and handing me over to her to take me away, not knowing where. And so she came and she says, "You're going to stay at the farm." And I was so happy. I thought, great, you know, there'll be puppies and kittens and children, and I'll be able to play outside and I won't have to hide. And I jumped up on this cart. It had a wooden bench, and off we go. And she even let me hold the reins for a while, and I was very happy to be going off with this young woman. And we traveled what seemed a very long time, and we got to her farm. Her farm was on the side of a hill. Her house was sort of halfway up the hill, and at the entrance of the farm to the left was a little barn. It was a small barn with 2 stalls, one for a horse, one for a cow, with a little attic above it. They used to throw the hay up. There was no hay bales then. And there were some rickety stairs going up this little attic. And she takes me out of the cart and she says, "You're staying here." And I said, "What do you mean staying here? Why can't I go to your house?" She says, "You don't understand, dear. You have to stay here. I have to hide you because people want to kill you." You know, this idea that somebody wanting to kill me, I said to her, "Why would anybody want to kill me? I'm a good girl." She says, "You don't understand, dear. People want to kill you." And I didn't believe her. I didn't, this idea of somebody wanting to kill a 4.5, 5-year-old child is incomprehensible. I still don't believe death, you know. I'm 83 and I think death happens to other people. You know, I don't have time for that sort of thing. Everybody here at some point is going to die, but none of us can imagine death, especially a child, you know. Now, I was very annoyed, and I was stomping my feet and being a brat, and I said, "I want to go home. I don't like it here. I want to go home to my mommy and my daddy, and I hate it here, and it smells, and it's there." And she says, "No, no, no, you have to stay here." And she took me upstairs into this attic, and it was full of hay, and it was getting dark, and it was smelly, and there were things rustling in the hay, maybe mice, I don't know, big black spiders everywhere. And she says, "I'll be coming back and bringing you food later." She made me a bed, and she left me there. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. I cried through the night, and I cried through the next day. And she kept coming back and bringing me food, and I kept crying, and I kept stomping my feet and yelling and making a fuss. And she kept telling me, don't cry, don't make any noise. If anybody comes, make yourself very, very small. Be very quiet, because people want to kill you. And I kept telling her, "Nobody wants to kill me. I don't believe you. Stop telling me this. I don't like it." And you know, it's amazing. You can get used to things. And after a while, having stayed in this place for 3 months, I got used to it. I was totally alone. There was nobody to play with. There was nobody to talk to, except this woman, Elizabeth was her name, would bring me food several times a day. And she would warn me all the time to be very quiet because people want to kill me. And I said, "Oh yes, everybody wants to kill me." I didn't believe her. And I got used to being on my own. And when I think about it, you know, I raised 4 sons. I don't think I managed to keep them quiet for 10 minutes. I don't know how this woman managed to keep me quiet all that time, but quiet I was. And I got used to living there, and I got used to playing by myself. I made little toys out of the hay, and I even managed to befriend one of the spiders. And I caught this spider, and I I put a string on his leg and he became my pet. And I was so happy I had a pet, but then the leg came off. Then I was very guilty because I thought I maimed my pet. It was pretty miserable, actually. And, you know, one morning, very, very early in the morning, I heard a commotion, and I looked through the cracks of the barn, and this poor woman was being beaten by 3 soldiers, again in the green uniforms with the black feathers, and they were slapping her, saying, "Where's the Jew? We know you're hiding a Jew. Where's the Jew? Where's the Jew?" She says, "There's no Jew," and she's bleeding from the mouth and the nose, and she's crying. And she says, "Go look at my house, there's no Jew." So they go up to her house, and they ransack the house, and they're very annoyed because there's no Jew there, and they start throwing the furniture out the window, and things are breaking, and there's a lot of noise. And then they decide to leave, and they go past the barn, and as they go past the barn, one of them says, "Wait a minute, maybe the Jew is there." And they start coming up the rickety stairs of the barn. By this time, I realized there was something serious going on, and I scooched under the hay, under the eaves, and I pulled the hay over me. And I remember I shut my eyes really tight, and I held my breath. But I was scared because my heart was beating so loudly, I thought they could hear it. It was like a drum. And they kept coming closer. And they used their bayonets to look through the hay. They were throwing the hay around, looking for the Jew. And they kept coming closer and closer. And I remember I opened one eye, and there was a big black boot next to my face. And then the bayonet came down, right next to my face, about 1 inch from my cheek. And then it got stuck in the wood. And then he pulled it out. And that's when I realized what it means to die. It means that somebody's going to stick a knife in your head. And I stopped complaining. I was completely silent. I couldn't even move. Then they left, and she came to see me, and she says, "Don't worry, they're gone. They didn't find you. You were a good girl. You didn't make any noise." But I couldn't even stand. My legs wouldn't carry me. I was totally terrified. That's when I think my childhood ended to some extent, because after that, things were not the same. But I stopped complaining, and I was very, very quiet. And at this point, they arrested my mother because somebody found out that I wasn't in the ghetto. And they figured that she must have hidden me, and they tortured her. And she never told us what they did to her. She didn't want me to know. She said it was far too humiliating. But this woman, who was always happy and laughing, I didn't see her laugh after that. She changed. I don't know what they did to her, but she changed. But she managed not to tell them. And she also managed to bribe somebody and smuggle my father out of the ghetto and get him to walk across the border into Romania to stay alive. And he said to her, "Before I leave, I want to see the child one last time. I want to tell her that I'm not abandoning her. It's the war, and I will see her again, and I want to explain to her what is going on. I don't want her to feel abandoned. She has to say goodbye to me." And my mother kept begging him, "Don't do it, it's dangerous." He says, "I don't care, I want to see her." And he walked all night with a little bag on his back to the farm. And around midnight, he got into the gate of the farm, and somebody was waiting for him there. And they caught him, and they arrested him. And they deported all of them the next day to Auschwitz. And he never came back. And you know, to this day, I feel a certain amount of guilt, because if my father didn't love me that much, maybe he wouldn't have had such a bad ending. Maybe he would have saved himself. Maybe he could have escaped. But you know, guilt is something you don't control. I mean, it just comes in waves. And at this point, my mother came to their farm, and she was very, very happy. And she says, the war started. Can you imagine being happy about the war starting? And she says, and the Russians will come, and they'll be very nice to us, and they're not going to persecute the Jews, and Daddy will be able to come home, and you can come home to our apartment, and everything will be fine. And she took me, and she said goodbye to Elizabeth, and I said goodbye to Elizabeth, who was waving a handkerchief at the end of the driveway there, saying goodbye. She was crying. And we went back to our apartment, and I was so happy. But it wasn't that easy, because the war was raging. There were air raids the whole time, sirens, you know, just like the ones you hear on the news now about Ukraine, that same siren. The sirens would go off, and then everybody would have to go to the cellar, and then another siren would sound that it was okay to come out, and then we'd go upstairs. And this went on the whole time. At a point, we didn't go down to the cellar anymore because it was so often. I mean, people just didn't bother. We just watched the war from the window. And we had no food, and we had no fuel, and it was cold, and we were very, very hungry. And there was nothing to eat. My mother found a few potatoes in the basement, and she made them in all kinds of very creative ways, but there was not much food at all. And all we could think about is eating. You know, people think about hunger. It's not like, oh, I'm a little bit hungry. Hunger is something that takes over your whole being. All you can think is food, food. Your breath smells. You smell. Your body aches. Your head hurts. Your stomach hurts. And you look around the whole time. You open drawers to see if maybe somebody forgot a cookie or a piece of bread. And all you can think about is food. You're obsessed with food. And during this time, I remember looking out the window, and there was a horse and carriage that went in front of the house with somebody's pathetic belongings, and the horse dropped right in front of our house. And the man got out and started kicking the horse, but the horse was definitely dead. And so he just unhooked the cart and pulled the cart away and left the horse there. And within minutes, doors and windows opened, and people ran out with dishes and knives, and they started cutting up this dead horse. And it was cold, and I remember as they pulled the hide off the horse, there was steam coming out. It was still warm. And we all ate this horse. Everybody was involved eating this poor dead horse. And you know, to this day, I could never eat a horse because, I mean, I raised 2 horses here in New Hampshire. They died of old age, 29 and 30 years old. I could never eat a horse. But when you're hungry, you can eat anything. And this horse tasted so good. That's all we had to eat. And we made soup out of the bones, and we ate the horse. We were so hungry. We were absolutely starved. And the war raged on, and the war went on. And the Russians were coming across the river. Our house overlooked the river, which was frozen, and the Russians were coming down one embankment, across the frozen river and up on this side. And as they came up our embankment, they were machine gunned. And the people on this side would just mow them down. And they kept coming in waves. They were holding arms and singing. They must have been drunk because nobody's brave enough to walk into machine gun fire. And they kept coming, singing and coming and singing. And the piles of corpses were so high you couldn't see the river anymore. They were being killed by the hundreds. And eventually the people on this side stopped shooting, or they ran out. I don't know what happened, but suddenly they stopped shooting, and we were under Russian occupation. Well, the Russians were not warm and fuzzy like my mother said. They were pretty mean. They were killing people, they were raping the women, they were stealing stuff, and everybody had to hide, and the women were hiding. My mother made a false wall in one of the rooms, and the women from the area were all hiding there, terrified, and we were still very hungry. And my mother decided to do something about it, and she decided to go and talk to the local commander. But she couldn't go out easily because she was young and pretty, so she had to make herself look old. She took an old raggedy gray dress and she put a pillow under it on her back to make herself look like a hunchback. And she blackened her teeth and she put white chalk in her hair and a scarf over her head. And she bent double, she took a cane and she pretended to be a very, very, very old woman. And she went to see the local commander. And to her surprise, the local commander was a young woman. By this time, the Russians lost so many people in the war that they were promoting young people and women to high positions. And through the interpreter, she said to this woman, listen, come to my house, I'm a dressmaker, I'm gonna make you look pretty. And the woman came and my mother unhooked a drape and put it on her and made her a beautiful dress. And the woman was absolutely delighted. And my mother even dressed her hair. And then she brought some other Russian girls. And my mother and the women were making clothes for them out of old materials. And suddenly we had food. We had a chicken and we had even chocolate and we had butter and eggs. And everybody was eating and eating and eating, and we were all terribly ill. Because when you've been hungry, you shouldn't eat suddenly, because you get very ill. Your body isn't used to it, and we almost died from eating too much. And it took a while for us to realize that we had to be slow. We can't eat so much, and we had to be very careful. Eventually, we managed to figure that out, but we still couldn't go out because the Russian soldiers were molesting people. So my mother asked the commander to get us a guard. Well, she got us 2 guards. One of them was a young man, can't have been more than 17, tall blonde boy called Ivan. He was a captain. And his sidekick was an elderly gentleman, a big heavy gentleman who always played the accordion. And they were a very happy pair. And they were constantly drunk. I've never seen people drink like these people. They were drinking, drinking, drinking. They drank methylated spirits, and they drank my mother cologne, and they drank anything they could get their hands on, and they were constantly drunk. But you know, there's 2 kinds of drunks. There's happy drunks, and there's nasty drunks. They were happy drunks. I loved them. They were great. They taught me how to sing Russian songs and how to dance Russian dances. And they were kind of wild. Yes, they would shoot at parts of the room, you know, target practice. And when it got very cold, they would burn our antique furniture. But it was okay. I mean, they were nice. They didn't hurt us. They were very nice. And one day, Ivan decided to bring, that was his name, Ivan, decided to bring my mother a gift. And the best thing you can give a Hungarian housewife is a goose liver. He brought a goose liver wrapped in paper, and it had a bit of blood on it, so he decided to clean it up before he presented it to my mother. And having come from somewhere where they didn't have running water, he found the toilet. So he washed it in the toilet, but it was still a bit bloody, so he pulled the chain. The liver goes away. He gets angry. He shoots the toilet. But that's okay. That was Ivan. He was nice. He really was nice. He was. And one day he decided to bring me a gift. I was ill, and he brought me this beautiful thing wrapped in white paper. I thought it was a ball, and I opened it up, and it was an orange. I had never seen an orange before, because in those days people didn't import fruit. You know, you ate what grew there. And I saw this beautiful thing coming out of the paper. It was like the rising sun, and it was beautiful, and it smelled so good. And then my mother opened it up and gave me bits of it, and then she candied the rest. And I could only have it when I was ill. And I wanted to be ill all the time so I could eat the orange. You have no idea what an orange meant to a child who had been starving. It was the most incredible gift I've ever had. And you know, to this day, there's always an orange in my house. It's my feeling of security. And at some point, all these Russian soldiers were moved somewhere else. They were gone. And life started returning to kind of normal, but my mother didn't have a lot of customers because people had no money, but she managed to make dresses. She bartered. She would make a shirt for a pound of butter or some eggs. We always had food after that. But things were pretty sad, and you know, this woman who had always laughed a lot wasn't smiling, wasn't laughing. And then one day she came and she says, I think Daddy's coming home. By this time we heard about the concentration camps, but nobody believed it. It was so unbelievable because, you know, how could we imagine the most civilized country in the world, Germany, wanting to exterminate people? We didn't believe it. I mean, it's as unbelievable as if it was happening here. If somebody told you that everybody in Ohio was going to be killed, you wouldn't believe it. We thought it was propaganda. We didn't believe it. We thought the Jews were taken away to work somewhere and they were coming back. And my mother said, there's 3 trains coming and Daddy's going to be on one of them and we're going to go and see Daddy. And she dressed me and she did my hair and she got all dressed and looking pretty. And I thought to myself, oh my God, Daddy's coming and he's going to see me. And what's Daddy going to think? Is he going to be happy how big I got? And is he going to be proud of me? And we got to the railway station and the train came in and we stood there holding up a picture of my father saying, have you seen this man? Have you seen this man? Have you seen this man? Here, have you seen this man? And people came off the train, and Daddy wasn't on the train. And my mother took me home, and we went home crying. And she says, well, he'll be on the next train. Daddy is not going to forget to come home. I mean, Daddy is coming back. Don't you worry, he'll be on the next train. So the next day, we went and held the picture up and waited for Daddy, and still no Daddy. And the people who were coming off the train were scary. They were not like humans. They were in rags and they had no hair and they had sores all over and they smelled bad and they didn't walk, they shuffled and you couldn't tell if they were men or women. They were sort of ghost-like and they looked awful. And my mother started taking these people home and she would bathe them and give them clothes, her clothes to the women and my father's clothes to the men. And they were telling us these horrible stories, which I wasn't supposed to hear. I would hide behind the sofa and listen anyway. And I started getting very frightened about my daddy, because if these people had these horrible things happen to them, where is my daddy? And I'm not going to go into details. You all know what happened in concentration camps. And all these stories were horrible to a small child. I was, by this time, 5.5, and I was terrified. And then my mother says, well, he'll be on the 3rd train. So we went back and we held the picture up and we stood at the railway station. And a man came up to my mother and said, don't wait for him. He's dead. And my mother says, what do you mean he's dead? I mean, was he ill? He says, I saw him, he's dead, don't wait for him. And she said, well, how do you know who I am and who are you? And he says, don't you recognize me? He happened to be a very good friend of our family, but he was in such bad shape, my mother didn't recognize him. He was broken up. He had been a violinist, and when they found out, they broke all his fingers and didn't set his hands, and he had hands like claws. And he scared me, and this man, this poor man was a real wreck, and my mother took him home, and he said, well, I'll tell you later, but I have to go and find everything I left with our housekeeper, so I'll go and find out if if they heard anything about the family or anything happened. And he went to the house of his housekeeper, and she opened the door wearing his wife's dress. And she looked him up and down and says, "Oh, so they didn't kill all of you." Anyway, the Russians took everything, and she slams the door in his face, and he comes back. And he says, "I have nothing." She wouldn't give me anything. I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. I don't know where anybody is. And my mother sort of let him stay with us. And slowly over time, out of two broken families, we cobbled together a new one. But I never became his daughter, and he never became my daddy. He was always my stepfather. And he told us what happened to him and his family. This is his little daughter. She was 11 years old. Her name was Dita. And she was a very happy little girl. She used to sing and dance. She played several musical instruments. She was a very bright child. She wanted to be an actress when she grew up. And when him and his wife and child were taken to Auschwitz, when they got them out of the train, the wife and the child were sent to one side and the father to the other. And they marched the women off. And he said to one of the guards, "Where are they going?" And the guard pointed to a chimney that was spewing fire. He says, "There." At this point, he didn't understand what it meant. He understood later, but at that point, he didn't understand what it meant. They took the women and the children directly from the train to the showers, as they called them, and they gassed them and they burnt them that same day. And this poor man told us the story, and I remember listening to all this, and I was very, very scared. I was very scared for my father. And then he told me, when I was a bit older, he told me how my father died. Apparently, he never told my mother, but he told me, my father and another man from town stole a piece of bread because they were starving, and it was found out. And the commander decided to make an example of them. So they took the two men, this was cold weather, they stripped them naked and they beat them half to death with iron bars. And they took each man and put them each in a dog cage and left them in the big field where people had to line up every morning to be counted. And it took my father 2 days and a night to die. And when I heard this, I became totally obsessed with vengeance. All I wanted to do was kill somebody who did this to my daddy. I was so full of rage. I was quite sick. All I could think of is devising forms of torture for people who did this. I wanted to kill. I wanted revenge. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to kill. I was quite ill with bitterness and vengeance and violence. All I could think of is how to kill people. And you know, it took me 50 years to stop hating. I don't hate anymore. I don't forgive because I can't forgive somebody else's death. I always tell my kids, if anybody kills me, if you forgive them, I'll haunt you. Don't you dare. Because I can forgive anything that happens to me. I don't have a right to forgive somebody else's death. And over the years, I managed to empty my heart of hatred. Because when you're full of hatred, there's no room for anything else. And I somehow managed to fill my soul with love. I suppose it's kind of a religion for me. People say to me, "What's your religion?" I say, "I don't know. I'm a Christmas Jew. I have a Christmas tree." But I find that love is about the only thing that you can heal with. And basically, I found that when that happened to me slowly, I managed to become normal again. I still miss my father. I miss the fact that there is no memorial, there's no grave, there's nothing to remember him by. And when I'm gone, little Dita won't be remembered either. This little girl. And you know, just to show you how good your generation is, when I was talking at the school, the 8th grade asked for this picture, and they printed 500 copies of it with her story on the back. They called it the Dita Project, and they sent it to 500 middle schools to keep them in the library so that she wouldn't be forgotten. And this is the difference between your generation and the ones before. You guys are better. You really are. You care more. And, you know, I am a very, very happy person. Believe it or not, I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. The only way to react to victimhood is not to accept it. If somebody bullies you, do not become a victim. Be a survivor, because if you become a victim, they win. And you know, I'm a very lucky person. I have 4 sons, and every time I gave birth to one of my sons, I was giving the finger to Hitler. It was such a triumph, you know. Every time I had a son, I thought to myself, there you are, you're dead, and I'm alive, and we're still alive. And I'm going to go on, and then my children will have children, and you are dead, Hitler. And, you know, I have a very nice multicultural family. I have 4 granddaughters, and they range from, one is half African American, one is half Chinese, one is half Mexican, and I even have one who's half German. When one of my sons came to me and says, I'm getting married to this very nice young Canadian woman, and I said, oh, wonderful. He said, well, there's a slight problem. What kind of problem can there be? Well, her father was a German soldier. So I swallowed, and I swallowed again. And then I thought, no, we don't visit the sins of the father on the children. And when I held their little daughter, who was born soon after, I was holding this baby in my arms, and I was crying, and I was thinking, this is the grandchild of a perpetrator and the victim, and she's perfect. And we must go forward. We cannot go back. We have to go forward. We cannot hate. We have to love, and we have to try and stop this happening again, and we have to just go on. And I speak for the dead because they are not here to speak for themselves. And I honestly feel that 10% of human beings are pretty awful. 10% are wonderful. Unfortunately, 80% are sheep, and the sheep scare me. Because the sheep will find it very easy to follow the bully. It's easier to follow the bully because all you have to do is stand there and do nothing when somebody gets hurt or bullied. But if you decide not to follow the bully, you might have to stand up and do something. You might have to do something good. You might have to stand up for somebody. You might have to object to somebody being hurt. It's very easy to do nothing. You have to stand up and be counted. You cannot be a bystander. You cannot let the world go by and not voice your good opinion. Don't look away. Please don't look away. And you know, it's very easy to scapegoat. We always think of the other. Who is your other in your life? Is it the gay person, the immigrant? Who are we persecuting today? There's always somebody being persecuted. Is it that kid who's weird, that has funny food, that smells funny? Or is that kid who doesn't react properly? Don't other anybody. Everybody is exactly like you. We all bleed the same way. You know, unfortunately, when we don't make it a point to know the other, then the other is strange. And if somebody is strange, we're afraid of them. And if we're afraid of them, we tend to hurt them. And this is how genocide can happen. It starts with a push. It starts, I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't like the way you look. It starts with a push, and it can end it can escalate. You can see it happening. And, you know, there's genocides going on at the moment, as you know. There's a genocide going on at the moment in Ukraine. I mean, how many of you know what's going on in Ukraine? Can you put your hands up if you know? Okay. You're all very well versed. Well, let me tell you, when I hear the sirens and when I hear the news, I'm suddenly 5 years old again. It really does affect me because the sounds are the same. And those kids, just think of those kids, they look like you, they eat similar food, they wear similar clothes because they listen to the same music, they play the same games as you. They're like you, they're not even a different color, and they're being killed now. I mean, they're not Jews, so it can happen to anybody. Anybody can be persecuted. This is why we have to be so careful, and you have to be vigilant, not that it doesn't happen. Don't let it happen, because you guys, you know, you have the world in your hand. You are, unfortunately, the only people who can change the world, because you were dealt a bad deal here. You were given a very bad situation, and the only way you can fix it is by standing up to it, because whatever you do in your world will be your future and your children's future. I'm almost out of here, but you guys have a world to change. You'll have to do it, because nobody else is doing it for you. You're a better generation than the one before. I really mean that. The generation before you were very concerned about money and success. You guys are much more concerned about the environment and not to want to live in your parents' basement when you're 55. And the only way you can do that is if you take this world and grab it. You know, I was listening to a lecture by a wonderful man called Ben Ferencz. He was one of the prosecutors in Nuremberg. After the war, the Allies put some of the Nazis on trial, and he was one of the prosecutors. And he was telling the story about when his immigrant father sat him and his young sister down at the dinner table and said to them, "What have you done for humanity today?" The two little children, they were quite young, had to do something good every single day, whether it's opening a door for someone, carrying a parcel, feeding an animal. They had to do something good, and each of us has incredible power. Look at the power of one. Look at this young woman who saved not only me, my 4 sons, my 4 granddaughters, and a whole generation of people by one good deed. And I'm not saying you have to be a hero, but if you do one good little thing every day, the whole world will change. You guys are different, and you know, I say to people, and this is not appreciated a lot of the time, I say, don't listen to your parents and don't listen to your teachers. Listen to your heart. Listen to your mind. Do your research. Don't believe the bullshit that some people tell you. Do your research and look for the truth. The truth is out there, and you have an incredible tool in your hands. You have the phone, you have the iPhone. I have one too, believe it or not. And if you have that incredible tool, you can reach people. You can stop the world going bad. You can save the world. If only you band together and find out what the truth is, you can make all the difference. I truly believe that your generation can save the world. And I just want to do one last quote. I want to read something that Winston Churchill said to the young people during the bombings in World War II, during the bombings in London. And I'm going to read it because his English is better than mine. He said, "Hear these young men and women everywhere, proclaim it far and wide. The earth is yours and the fullness thereof. Be kind, but be fierce. You are needed now more than ever. Take up the mantle of change, for this is your time. Guys, this is your time. Go out and save the world." Thank you.
We have a couple of minutes, so if anyone has any questions, we do have microphones, or you can shout them, or if you... That's true, Kathy has no filter, she says. So, as you can tell, she can ask anything, she says. So if anyone has any questions, if you don't want to ask it yourself, raise your hand and we can come over to you as well. I know. She says not to be shy. Questions? Ooh, we got a couple coming up.
Out of all of the terrible things that happened to you, what would you consider the most traumatizing to you personally?
I think it was a bayonet.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that kind of stands out. The other things I could deal with.
I'm very sorry to hear your story.
Thank you, my love. But look, I'm happy.
I'm happy you're happy.
Thank you.
What language did you speak at home?
We spoke Hungarian. I speak 8 languages, but I forgot one of them. I speak Hungarian, Romanian, French, English, Hebrew, Italian, Portuguese, and German. Yeah, that's right. But I forgot Romanian for some reason, so I'm down to 7 now.
Also, have you ever gone back to your hometown?
Have I done what?
Have you ever gone back to your hometown?
No. Would you?
I don't think so.
No. No, I want to remember my childhood as a golden childhood, not the blood-soaked childhood.
Honestly, how did you find it in your heart to heal from everything and forget that hate?
Strangely enough, one thing happened to me. I was about, I would say, 8. I was going home from school. By this time it was Romania, and I had long braids, and one of the kids cut off one of my braids, and I was going home with my braid in my hand, crying, and an old man, no idea who he was, stopped me and says, "Little girl, stop crying." I said, "Yes, why?" He says, "Stop crying, cut off the other braid, and you look very pretty, and your hair will grow back. But if you don't stop crying, and if you let them make you hate, you will be unhappy. Stop hating them, and stop crying, and don't be a victim." And that was like a switch almost. It started healing after that. And now, by speaking to people like you, I feel very good, you know. I feel I'm loved. I'm loved, I feel very safe. I go home and I'm high for a couple of days. I don't need drugs.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
All right, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Okay, so how exactly do you deal the events with in the story that one that you just presented us to?
How do you deal with the events?
How do I deal with these events now?
No, with the events from your past. Like, how do you...
Well, there is sorrow, and there is a lot of hope. Because every time I look at one of my children and my grandchildren, I see the future, not the past.
And there's a new grandchild coming.
There's a new grandchild coming on Friday. Did I answer his question? Thank you. Go ahead.
So I know that when a lot of people experience trauma, they forget it as a coping mechanism. So did you ever wish or wish now? Have you ever wished before that you could just forget it?
No, I don't. Because I think it would be a betrayal of my family if I forgot it all. I'm the only thing that they have left. They're gone. And the memory. I'm a walking memory. I don't want to forget because I want to remember them by remembering. And by sharing this, you guys will remember them too. And maybe they will not just be obliterated to the same extent. No, I don't wish. I want to know. I want to understand it. And the more I accept it and the more I can think about it, the easier it is to heal. It took a long time.
All right, last question.
So, what was your mother like after the war? Because
She was very subdued is the word, and she could never watch any movies or news with war. She loved wrestling because she always thought that the underdog was a Nazi. So she would cheer for the good person. That's about the only thing that I remember as a very strange thing about her. But she was very subdued. She didn't laugh out loud anymore. People are affected by it. I don't know what they did to her. She never told me. But anyway, all I want to say, guys, is I think that you guys have incredible power in your hands. You're going to have to change the world because nobody else is going to do it for you. You have to do it yourselves. Just grab it. And don't let them take your freedoms away. Do not let them. Don't let them. Save the world. It's your world.
If any of you still have questions and you want to come up really quickly, I can give you a smart pass to your next class, but it's time to head to block 3. Thank you so much.